The needle sat at 1137. Dr. Marin Sokol noticed it at 06:14 station time, 40 minutes into her calibration shift, when the gravity wave detector in Bay 9 should have been reading background noise and nothing else. The detector was a Kessler-Brandt Mark IV, 6 tons of crystalline suspension medium housed in a vacuum sleeve the size of a shipping container, and its primary gauge an analog needle backed by a digital redundancy, because the compact insisted on both, was supposed to be twitching between 0 and the thermal floor. Instead, the needle had found a value and stopped. 1137. She tapped the glass. The needle did not move. She checked the digital readout beneath it. 0.00729927, which was the same number expressed as a decimal, which was the fine structure constant, which was one of the most fundamental ratios in physics, and which had absolutely no business appearing on a gravity wave detector during a background calibration run in an empty bay on Threshold Station. Sokol pulled up the diagnostic panel and ran the self-test. Every subsystem reported nominal. The suspension medium was at operating temperature. The vacuum sleeve was holding. The isolation cradle showed no seismic input, no electromagnetic interference, no thermal gradient. The detector was functioning perfectly, and it was telling her that the local gravity wave background of Bay 9 matched, to 6 decimal places, the fine structure constant. She reset the instrument. The needle swung to 0, dithered for 4 seconds, and returned to 1137. She reset it again, same result. The third reset took longer. She powered down the suspension medium, let it warm to ambient, recooled it from scratch, reinitialized the firmware, and watched. The needle rose from 0 like a compass finding north, smooth and unhurried, and settled at 1137. The digital readout confirmed, 0.00729927. Sokol sat on the edge of the calibration bench and stared at the gauge for a full minute. Bay 9 was bright with overhead daylight panels, the clean white gold glow that Threshold Station piped from its twin-sun collectors. Dust motes drifted in the light. The detector hummed at its operating frequency, a sound she had lived with for 3 years. She reached for her comm and called Ro Tessic. Tessic was the station's senior Velanth observer, assigned to Threshold by the Compact's Bureau of Metrology to oversee human experimental equipment and ensure it met galactic calibration standards. Sokol had worked with Tessic for 18 months. The Velanth was precise, methodical, and deeply suspicious of human instrumentation on principle, which made Tessic exactly the person Sokol needed. Tessic arrived in Bay 9 11 minutes later, carrying a portable reference standard, a Velanth-manufactured gravity reference unit that the Bureau considered the galactic gold standard. Tessic's 4-jointed hand set the unit on the bench with surgical care, powered it up, and aimed its sensor at the same region of space the Kessler-Brandt was measuring. The reference unit's display stabilized. 1137. Tessic's crest, a ridge of cartilaginous plates running from forehead to nape, flattened against the skull. In Velanth body language, that was the equivalent of a human going pale. "Your instrument is not malfunctioning," Tessic said. "No," Sokol agreed, "it isn't. This value should not appear on a gravity wave detector. It is electromagnetic. It belongs to photon-electron vertex coupling. It has no gravitational analog." "I know." Tessic stared at the reference unit's display. The crest stayed flat. "The value is real. Both instruments agree. The question is what is producing it." Sokol had already been turning that question over. A gravity wave signal matching the fine structure constant wasn't random noise that happened to land on a familiar number. The precision was too high, the stability too perfect. Something in Bay 9, or in the space Bay 9 occupied, was generating a gravity wave output whose amplitude was locked to 1137. That meant the source knew what 1137 was. That meant the source was encoding information. I want to map it, Sokol said. Tessik's crest lifted a fraction, not relaxed, but attentive. Elaborate. If the signal is localized, I can triangulate. I need 3 more detectors in this bay, spaced at known distances, and I need them calibrated independently before they come in. You wish to determine whether this is a point source or a field? Yes. Tessik considered. I will authorize the additional detectors from the Bureau's reserve. I will calibrate them myself on Velanth equipment before they enter this room. If they read the same value, the anomaly is confirmed beyond instrumentation bias. And if they read different values, then the anomaly is directional, and we triangulate. It took Tessik 4 hours to calibrate 3 additional gravity wave detectors. Sokol spent those 4 hours in Bay 9, watching the needle. It did not move. The value held with a steadiness that no natural signal should have possessed. Gravity waves, even strong ones, fluctuated. They carried the signatures of their sources, the wobble of orbiting masses, the ringtone of collisions, the thermal shiver of matter under stress. This signal had none of that. It was a single clean note, unwavering, as though someone had tuned a string to 1137 and held it there. She ran a frequency analysis. The signal occupied a single narrow band centered at 0.7 MHz, a period of about 23 minutes per cycle. She ran a polarization analysis. The signal was linearly polarized, oriented along the station's vertical axis. She ran an amplitude modulation analysis. There was none. The signal was constant. Tessik returned with the 3 detectors, each sealed in a Velanth calibration case with a Bureau certification tag. They placed them at the corners of an equilateral triangle, 3 meters on a side, with the Kessler brand at the center. Tessik powered each one individually. All 3 read 1137. No directional variation, no amplitude gradient. The signal was the same strength, the same frequency, the same polarization at every point in the room. It was not a point source. It was a field, a uniform gravity wave field filling the entire volume of Bay 9, locked to a value that belonged to a completely different branch of physics. Sokol felt the hair on her forearms rise. Not from any physical effect, the signal was far too weak to produce a detectable force on human tissue. The hair rose because she understood what the uniformity meant. A point source could be explained. A field could not. A field meant the signal was not coming from any object in the room. It was coming from the room itself, from the geometry of the space, from the fabric of whatever Bay 9 was made of at the most fundamental level. The space is resonating, she said. Tessik's crest went flat again. Clarify. The fine structure constant defines the strength of electromagnetic interaction. It's dimensionless, it doesn't depend on units, on scale, on the observer. It's a property of the universe itself. And now it's showing up in gravity, as if the 2 forces are coupled here. As if this patch of space has a resonance that links them. That coupling does not exist in standard physics. I know. If it existed, it would unify 2 of the 4 fundamental forces. I know. Tessik was silent for 6 seconds. Sokol counted. Then the Velanth said, I am required to report this to the Bureau. How long before they send a team? If I classify it as a calibration anomaly, 72 hours. If I classify it as a fundamental physics event, they will send a delegation within 12, and the delegation will include a compact enforcement detail that will seal this bay and restrict your access. Classify it as a calibration anomaly. Tessik's crest rose and fell, the Velanth equivalent of a slow blink. That would be inaccurate. It would give us 72 hours to understand what we're looking at before someone decides it's dangerous and buries it. You believe they would suppress it. I believe that a signal which unifies gravity and electromagnetism in a single room on a human-administered station will terrify every species in the compact. And terrified bureaucracies don't investigate. They contain. Tessic studied her for a long moment. The crest settled into a neutral position, neither flat nor raised. I will classify it as a calibration anomaly, Tessic said, but I am accompanying you for every subsequent measurement. And if at any point I determine that the anomaly poses a safety risk, I will reclassify immediately and without consultation. Agreed. Sakal did not sleep that night. She set up a continuous monitoring array, all 4 detectors logging simultaneously, synchronized to station time, recording the signal's amplitude, frequency, and polarization at 1-second intervals. She watched the data stream on her console while Tessic ran parallel checks on the Velanth reference unit. The signal held. Hour after hour, the needle sat at 1137, and the data stream was a flat line. At 0230, she had an idea. If the space was resonating at a frequency that coupled gravity and electromagnetism, then the coupling should work both ways. A gravity wave signal was appearing as an electromagnetic constant. Could she induce an electromagnetic signal that would appear as a gravitational constant? She configured one of the spare detectors as an emitter, reversing its polarity, feeding it a calibrated electromagnetic pulse at the fine structure frequency. The pulse was tiny, barely above the noise floor, shaped to match the polarization and frequency of the ambient signal. She fired it. The needle on the Kessler branch jumped. Not randomly, not chaotically. The gauge swung from 1137 to a new value and held there, 6.674, which Sakal recognized immediately. It was the first 4 digits of Newton's gravitational constant, expressed in SI units. The signal had responded to her electromagnetic input by shifting its gravitational output to a different fundamental constant. It answered, she whispered. Tessic was already at the reference unit. The Velanth's crest was fully erect. Alarm. Confirmed. The reference unit reads the same value. The field has changed. Your pulse changed it. I didn't change it. I asked it a question, and it gave me a different number. I spoke in electromagnetism, and it replied in gravity. That is not a natural phenomenon. No, it's a dialogue. Sakal's hands were shaking. She locked them together behind her back and forced herself to think. The signal had responded to a structured input with a structured output. It had translated between forces. It had selected a meaningful reply, not noise, not a random shift, but Newton's constant, the gravitational equivalent of what she had sent it electromagnetically. The symmetry was deliberate. The intelligence behind it was obvious. But intelligence implied a source, and the source was not in the room. The source was the room, the geometry of space itself, resonating with information that should not exist in a universe governed by the physics Sakal had spent her career studying. She fired a second pulse. Different frequency, this time she swept through a band centered on the hydrogen hyperfine transition, 1420 MHz, the universal hello of radio astronomy. The gauge moved again. This time it settled on 1.616, which was the Planck length in units of 10 to the negative 35 meters. She fired a third pulse, the golden ratio. The gauge replied with Euler's number. She fired the speed of light. The gauge replied with Boltzmann's constant. Each exchange took less than a second. Each reply was precise to the detector's resolution limit, and each reply was a fundamental constant drawn from a different branch of physics than the input, as if the signal was demonstrating, methodically, that it could translate between every domain of physical law. Tessic had stopped checking the reference unit. The Velanth was standing perfectly still, crest fully extended, watching the exchanges with an expression that Sakal, after 18 months of working together, recognized as awe. It knows all of it, Tessic said quietly. Every constant, every relationship. It is not computing these answers. It is reading them from the structure of the space itself. Sakal nodded. Her hands had stopped shaking. The fear was still there, but it had been overtaken by something larger and more dangerous, the need to understand. I want to send it something that isn't a constant, she said. Something arbitrary, a pattern that has no physical meaning. If it can only echo fundamental constants, it's a lookup table, impressive but finite. If it can respond to arbitrary input, it's thinking. And if it is thinking, then we need to know what it wants. She configured a pulse sequence, prime numbers, 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13. Simple, structured, unmistakably intentional, but not a physical constant, not a property of the universe, a human invention. She sent it. The gauge needle dropped to 0 for the first time in 18 hours. It held there for 11 seconds. Then it began to move not to a single value, but in a pattern. The needle swept up and down in a series of distinct jumps. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11, 13, 17, 23, 29, 31. The next 10 primes delivered as gravity wave amplitude steps, each held for exactly 1 second. It had continued the sequence. Sakal sat down heavily. The calibration bench creaked under her. Bay 9 was bright and clean and humming, and something in the walls, in the space between the walls, in the geometry that made the walls possible, was doing mathematics. It's thinking, she said. Tessik's crest had not lowered. Dr. Sakal, I must inform you that the Bureau's classification of calibration anomaly is no longer tenable. Not yet. Give me 12 more hours. To what end? I need to find out if it's local. Is this phenomenon confined to Bay 9, or is it everywhere on the station? If it's everywhere, we're not looking at an anomaly. We're looking at a property of the universe that we somehow never noticed. And if it is confined to Bay 9, then something about this specific volume of space is different, and I need to know what. Tessik's crest lowered fractionally. The Velenth pulled a comm unit and made a brief encrypted transmission in the Bureau's administrative channel. Sakal heard enough to recognize a schedule adjustment, not a report. Tessik was buying time without lying about the reason. They spent the next 4 hours moving detectors. Bay 8 adjacent to Bay 9, background noise, no signal. Bay 10, background noise, the corridor, noise. The service tunnel beneath Bay 9. Noise. Sakal placed a detector on the ceiling of Bay 9, then outside the ceiling in the maintenance crawlspace above. Signal in Bay 9. Noise above it. The phenomenon was confined to the room. Specifically, it was confined to a volume of space that matched Bay 9's interior dimensions to within centimeters. Wherever the walls were, the signal was. Wherever the walls were not, it was absent. This was the first new problem. A universal property would have been frightening but comprehensible, a feature of physics waiting to be discovered. A room-shaped phenomenon was something else entirely. It meant the signal was not a property of the universe. It was a property of this specific space, created or activated by something about Bay 9's construction, or its location, or its contents. Sakal pulled the station's architectural records. Bay 9 had been built as a standard laboratory module during Threshold Station's Phase 2 expansion, 14 years ago. The construction materials were standard composite alloy, standard insulation, standard radiation shielding. The only notable feature was the bay's location. It sat at the geometric center of the station's habitable ring, equidistant from every structural node. She checked whether that mattered. She ran the numbers. The station's habitable ring was a torus with a major radius of 640 meters and a minor radius of 18 meters. Bay 9 sat at the torus's inner midpoint, the spot where the curvature of the ring, the rotation of the station, and the gravitational gradient of the station's orbit around the local binary star system, all intersected at a single balanced point. A node, a stillness point, a place where the competing forces of the station's geometry canceled each other out, leaving a pocket of space that was, in some sense, more fundamental than the space around it, less distorted, less noisy, closer to the universe's baseline. And in that pocket, the baseline was talking. Sakal understood then what she was looking at. Not a signal from an intelligence hiding in the walls, not a transmission from an alien species, not a machine. The fine structure constant had appeared on a gravity wave detector because in this one quiet pocket of space, the separation between forces broke down. Gravity and electromagnetism were not separate here. They were aspects of the same thing, and the thing they were aspects of expressed itself as the simplest possible relationship, a ratio, 1:137. The signal wasn't a message. It was the universe's own operating frequency, audible only in a place quiet enough to hear it. And when Sakal had sent its structured input, she hadn't been talking to an intelligence. She had been talking to physics itself, poking the fabric of reality with a stick and watching the ripples. But that created a new problem, because the ripples were getting larger. Tessic noticed it first. The Vellenth reference unit's precision was higher than the Kessler-Brandt's, and at 07:42 station time, 25 hours after Sakal had first noticed the gauge, Tessic reported that the signal's amplitude was increasing. Not by much, a fraction of a percent per hour, but the increase was monotonic, steady, and accelerating. Sakal checked the Kessler-Brandt. The needle was still at 1:137, but the digital readout showed the sixth decimal place climbing. 0.007299927 had become 0.007299931. The value was drifting away from the fine structure constant, not toward another constant, toward a larger number with no recognized significance. The pulses, Sakal said, my pulses, I pumped energy into the resonance. Each exchange added a tiny amount of electromagnetic energy to the field, and the field is absorbing it. It's growing. Growing toward what? I don't know, but the coupling strength is increasing. If gravity and electromagnetism are linked in this space, and the coupling is getting stronger, then at some point the gravitational component will become macroscopically detectable. Define macroscopic. Sakal ran a projection. At the current rate of increase, the gravitational field in Bay 9 would exceed the threshold of human perception detectable as a sensation of weight change in approximately 48 hours. In 72 hours, it would exceed the structural tolerance of the bay's floor plating. In 96 hours, it would exceed the structural tolerance of the station. We need to stop the resonance, Tessic said. The crest was flat, the voice was level, the Vellenth was frightened. I don't know how, I didn't start it. I amplified it, but it was already running when I walked in yesterday morning. Something activated the coupling and my pulses fed it, but even without my pulses it would still be growing, just slower. Then we seal the bay and evacuate the surrounding sections. That won't stop the growth. The resonance is in the space itself. You can't seal space. Then what do you propose? Sakal stared at the gauge. The needle had shifted barely, the width of a hair past the 1:137 mark. The number was no longer the fine structure constant. It was something new. Something she had made. I need to decouple it, she said. I need to find the resonance condition that's holding the gravity-electromagnetic link open and break it. If I can identify the harmonic, I can send an antiphase pulse, destructive interference. Cancel the resonance. You intend to interact with it further. After interaction is what caused the growth. Interaction amplified it because I was feeding it energy at its resonant frequency. An antiphase pulse would drain energy. It's the difference between pushing a swing and catching it. And if your antiphase calculation is wrong, then I feed it more energy, and the timeline accelerates. Tessic's crest rose and fell twice. Dr. Sakal. I must tell you that the rational course of action is to reclassify this event, evacuate the station, and allow the Bureau to assemble a team of specialists from across the compact. How long would that take? With an emergency reclassification, the delegation arrives in 12 hours. Assessment, another 12. Decision, another 12. If they decide to intervene rather than observe, another 24 hours for equipment. That's 60 hours. The gravitational field exceeds structural tolerance in 72. Which means if they take even slightly longer than your best case estimate, and bureaucracies always take longer, they'll be assembling their equipment while the station collapses. And if your intervention fails, the station collapses sooner. Yes. They looked at each other across the bright, humming bay. Dust motes turned in the twin sunlight. The 4 detectors sat at their positions, needles all reading the same drifting value, a number that was no longer a constant but a countdown. I will remain, Tessick said. I will monitor the reference unit and the structural sensors. If the gravitational field reaches 50% of floor plate tolerance, I am reclassifying and ordering an evacuation regardless of the state of your work. That gives you a deadline. How long? Tessick ran the numbers on the Bureau's portable. Approximately 31 hours from now. I'll take it. Sokol spent the next 8 hours mapping the resonance. She fired pulses at every frequency she could generate, in every polarization, at every power level, and she logged the response. Each pulse fed the resonance slightly, but the information she gained was worth the cost. She was building a complete profile of the coupling, a frequency response curve that showed exactly how the space in Bay 9 converted electromagnetic energy into gravitational energy and back. The curve was beautiful. It was the kind of data a physicist lives for, and never expects to see: a clean, elegant function with a single sharp peak at the fine structure frequency, symmetric shoulders, and a long tail that decayed exponentially on both sides. It looked like a resonance curve from a first-year physics textbook, except that it described a phenomenon that shouldn't exist: the coupling of 2 fundamental forces in a single volume of space. And it told her exactly what she needed. The resonance was narrowband, centered on a precise frequency. To cancel it, she needed to generate an antiphase pulse at that exact frequency, with an amplitude matched to the current state of the field. Too little and the pulse would be absorbed. Too much and it would ring the resonance like a bell, amplifying it catastrophically. The margin was thin. She calculated the parameters, triple-checked them. Then she ran into the second new problem. The resonance frequency was shifting. The same growth that was increasing the coupling strength was also changing the resonance's center frequency, dragging it away from the fine structure constant and toward higher values. The shift was small but continuous. Her antiphase pulse would need to track the frequency in real time, adjusting on the fly, for the entire duration of the cancellation. It wasn't a single shot. It was a dance. She built a feedback controller, improvised it from the detector array's firmware, and a signal processor she borrowed from the station's communications suite. The controller would monitor the resonance frequency, compute the antiphase, and drive the emitter in a continuous loop. It was the kind of system that a team of engineers would normally spend weeks designing, testing, and validating. Sokol built it in 6 hours. She tested it on a simulated signal. It worked. She tested it on a portion of the real signal using the weakest possible coupling. The gauge needle dipped by a fraction. The resonance responded to the antiphase exactly as predicted. But the dip lasted 4 seconds, and then the needle climbed back, not to its previous value higher. The resonance had compensated. It had absorbed the antiphase pulse, adapted to it, and come back stronger. This was the third new problem. The resonance was not passive. It was adaptive. It wasn't a standing wave in a fixed medium. It was a dynamic system that adjusted its parameters to maintain itself. When Sokol pushed, it pushed back. It's not a resonance, she said, staring at the data. It's a process. Something is actively maintaining the coupling. Something is feeding it. Tessic checked the structural sensors. Floor plate stress is at 12% of tolerance. Rate of increase is higher than projected. Your test accelerated the growth. I know. 23 hours remain before I reclassify. I know. Sakal forced herself to sit down, to breathe, to think. The puzzle had changed shape again. She was not dealing with a natural phenomenon that could be cancelled with interference. She was dealing with something that maintained itself, that responded to interference by adapting and growing. But adaptive systems had a property that passive ones did not. They had a goal. A passive resonance just existed. An adaptive process was trying to do something. And if she could figure out what it was trying to do, she could figure out how to stop it or, more precisely, how to give it what it wanted so it would stop on its own. She went back to the data. Every exchange she had conducted with the resonance was logged: her input pulse, the resonance's output, the timing, the amplitude. She laid them out in sequence and looked for a pattern. The pattern was there. She had been too focused on the individual responses to see it. Every response the resonance had given her was a fundamental constant from a different branch of physics than her input. Electromagnetic input, gravitational output, quantum input, thermodynamic output. She had read this as translation, the resonance demonstrating its ability to convert between forces. But that wasn't what it was doing. It was bridging. Each exchange linked two previously unlinked domains, and each link once made was permanent. The coupling between those two domains remained active in the resonance's profile, adding to its complexity and its energy. Sakal hadn't been having a dialogue. She had been building a web. Every question she asked gave the resonance a new connection between forces, and each new connection made the resonance stronger, more adaptive, harder to disrupt. She had been feeding it exactly what it needed. Not energy, information. Every structured pulse she sent taught it a new relationship between forces, and it used those relationships to grow. I need to stop interacting with it, she told Tessic. Completely. No more pulses. No more probes. Every interaction teaches it something, and what it's learning is how to unify the forces. It's using my inputs as a curriculum. Will cessation of interaction halt the growth? Sakal checked the projection. Without additional input, the growth rate would slow but not stop. The connections she had already built into the resonance were self-sustaining. The web would continue to grow from its own internal dynamics, feeding on the relationships she had already taught it. No, it's past the point of passive decay. The connections I made are permanent. Then we are in the scenario where the station's structural failure is inevitable, unless the resonance is stopped. Yes. And you cannot stop it by interacting with it, because interaction makes it stronger. Yes. Then the only remaining option is to reclassify and evacuate. There's one more option. Tessic waited. I can't cancel the resonance because it adapts. I can't starve it because the connections are self-sustaining, but I can complete it. Explain. It's building towards something. A unification. Every connection it makes brings it closer to linking all four fundamental forces in a single framework. That's what 1137 was: the first crack, the place where gravity and electromagnetism touched. It's been growing toward a complete theory ever since. If I help it finish, if I give it the final connections it needs, the process completes, and a completed process stops. You are proposing to accelerate the phenomenon that is threatening the station. I'm proposing to let it reach its endpoint. Right now it's growing because it's incomplete. An incomplete process seeks completion. A complete one is stable. That is a hypothesis. Yes. What if you are wrong? What if completion does not produce stability? What if a fully unified field in this room produces a gravitational singularity, or a phase transition, or an effect we cannot predict because no one in the history of the compact has ever observed a fully unified field? Then we're wrong and we lose Bay 9. And possibly the station. And possibly the station. Tesic's crest did something Sakal had never seen before. It shivered, every plate vibrating independently, a display of conflict that the Velanth normally suppressed. Then the plates settled, one by one, into a raised and locked position. Decision. I will give you 4 hours, Tesic said. If the structural stress exceeds 30% of tolerance at any point during those 4 hours, I reclassify immediately. If you have not completed the process by then, I reclassify. Those are my terms. Accepted. Sakal went to work. She had her resonance profile, her frequency response curve, and the log of every exchange. She mapped the connections she had already built: gravity to electromagnetism, quantum to thermodynamic, electromagnetic to quantum. The web was incomplete. It was missing the links between the strong nuclear force and the others, and between the weak nuclear force and the others. She knew what pulses to send. She had spent her entire career studying force unification. It was the reason she was on Threshold Station, the reason she had been running the gravity wave detector in Bay 9 in the first place. The theoretical relationships between the forces were well established in human physics. What had never been observed was the actual coupling, the physical mechanism by which the forces could be linked. And now that mechanism was sitting in front of her, asking to be fed. She calculated 4 final pulse sequences. Each one encoded a relationship between forces that the resonance had not yet incorporated: the strong force coupling to gravity, the strong force coupling to electromagnetism, the weak force coupling to gravity, the weak force coupling to electromagnetism. Each sequence was built from fundamental constants, structured as the resonance expected, delivered at the current resonance frequency with matched polarization and amplitude. She loaded the first sequence into the emitter and looked at the gauge. The needle was now well past 1137. The digital readout showed 0.00731, climbing steadily. The bay's floor plating was creaking softly, a sound she had never heard before. Structural stress at 14%. She fired the first pulse. The gauge leaped. The needle swung hard to the right past any value Sakal had seen, and the bay shuddered, a physical tremor, felt in the floor, in the bench, in her teeth. The structural alarm chimed once. Stress at 19%. The needle stabilized at a new value. The resonance had incorporated the strong gravity link. 3 more, Sakal said. Stress at 19%, Tesic confirmed. 11% increase from 1 pulse. 3 more at this rate will exceed 30%. You have no margin for overshoot. Sakal adjusted the amplitude of the remaining pulses. Lower power, longer duration, delivering the same information content with less instantaneous energy transfer. It would take longer, but the structural impact per pulse would be smaller. She fired the second pulse. The tremor was gentler. The stress climbed to 22%. The needle jumped and settled. Third pulse. Stress at 25%. The floor plating was groaning continuously now, a low metallic complaint that resonated through the bay's superstructure. The daylight panels flickered as the structural deformation shifted their mounting brackets. 25%, Tesic said. Dr. Sakal. 1 more. She loaded the final sequence. The last link. Weak force to electromagnetism, the connection that would complete the web, link all 4 fundamental forces in a single coupled system, and either stabilize the resonance or collapse Bay 9. The gauge needle was vibrating now, oscillating around a value that climbed with each swing. The digital readout was a blur of changing digits. The resonance was straining toward completion, the 3 new links she had added driving it toward the 4th with a momentum that felt almost hungry. Sokol's finger hovered over the emitter control. The bay groaned around her. The twin sun light streamed in through the viewports, bright and steady, indifferent to the geometry of forces twisting beneath the floor. She thought about what she was doing. She was a physicist sitting in a room that had taught her more about the structure of the universe in 36 hours than the compact's entire research apparatus had learned in 1,000 years. She was about to finish the lesson, and the lesson might kill her. She fired the pulse. The bay went silent. No tremor, no groan, no alarm. The structural stress readout dropped not slowly, not incrementally, but in a single step from 25% to 0. The floor plating stopped creaking. The daylight panels steadied. The detector's hum smoothed into a tone so clean it sounded like a tuning fork. The gauge needle swung to 1137 and stopped. Exactly 1137. Not drifting, not climbing, not oscillating. The fine structure constant, precise to the detector's full resolution, stable and unwavering. The same value Sokol had found 37 hours ago, as if nothing had happened. Except everything had happened. Tesik checked every instrument in sequence. The reference unit, 1137. The 3 additional detectors, 1137. The structural sensors, 0 stress, nominal, no residual deformation. The temperature, the vacuum, the suspension medium, all nominal. Bay 9 was exactly as it had been at 0614 the previous morning. It stabilized, Tesik said. It completed, Sokol corrected. The web is finished. All 4 forces are linked. The resonance doesn't need to grow anymore because it has everything it needs. 1137 is the resting state, the natural frequency of a fully unified field. Then the fine structure constant is not merely an electromagnetic ratio. No, it's the frequency of everything, the ratio at which all 4 forces balance. We just never had a quiet enough room to hear it. Tesik was silent for a long time. The Velenth's crest was in a position Sokol had never seen, half raised, half lowered, the plates arranged asymmetrically, which in Velenth body language expressed a state that did not have a direct human translation. The closest Sokol could come was reverent uncertainty. I must still report this, Tesik said. I know. The Bureau will send a delegation. They will study it. They will attempt to reproduce it. They should, but they should be careful. The resonance is stable now, but only because the web is complete. If they try to take it apart to remove one of the links, to study the components in isolation, they'll destabilize it. And a destabilized complete web will be far more dangerous than the incomplete one I was dealing with. You are saying that the only safe configuration is the unified one. I'm saying that once you've heard the universe's operating frequency, you can't unhear it. You can only learn to live with the sound. Tesik's crest settled slowly into a neutral position. The Velenth reached out and placed one 4-jointed hand on the Kessler-Brandt's casing, beside the gauge. The needle sat at 1137, still and sure. I will include your recommendation in my report, Tesik said. And I will classify this event accurately, not as a calibration anomaly, not as a fundamental physics event, as a discovery. What's the Bureau's protocol for a discovery? There is no specific protocol. Discoveries are rare enough that each one is handled individually. The last one was 400 years ago. What was it? The Velenth discovered faster-than-light communication. The Bureau classified it, studied it for 60 years, and then released it to the compact. 60 years. The Bureau is thorough. Sokol looked at the gauge. 1137. The number that had pulled her in, that had made her skip sleep and meals and safety protocols, that had driven her to feed a resonance she didn't understand because the answers were too beautiful to stop chasing. She had nearly destroyed the station. She had nearly destroyed herself. And the answer in the end was the same number she had started with. But now she knew what the number meant. She pulled up her console and began writing her report, not for the Bureau, for herself, a record of what she had done, what she had learned, and what she had nearly lost. She wrote it in the calm, methodical prose that her doctoral advisor had drilled into her 30 years ago. State the observation, describe the method, present the results, discuss the implications. No emotion, no drama, just the facts. But when she reached the section on implications, her hands paused over the keys. The implications were not calm. The implications were that Bay 9 contained proof that the four fundamental forces of the universe were not separate phenomena but aspects of a single thing, and that the single thing had a frequency, and that the frequency was 1137, and that this meant the fine structure constant was not merely a number but the universe's heartbeat. And any species that learned to listen to that heartbeat would have access to a physics that the compact had never imagined, a physics in which the forces were tools, not constraints. She would write that section carefully. She would understate it. She would bury the most dangerous implication in a subordinate clause and hope that whoever read it was paying attention. The most dangerous implication was this: Sokal had completed the resonance by feeding it the right information in the right order. She had taught the space in Bay 9 how to unify the forces, and the process, once completed, was stable, which meant it could be taught again, in another room, on another station, anywhere there was a quiet enough pocket of space and a physicist who knew the sequence. She had not just made a discovery, she had written a recipe, and recipes once written cannot be unwritten. Tessick stood at the viewport, crest neutral, watching the twin suns pour light into Bay 9. The four detectors hummed at their operating frequencies. The gauge read 1137. The bay was bright and still and full of a knowledge that would change everything, eventually, for everyone. "Dr. Sokal," Tessick said, without turning from the viewport. "Yes." "When the Bureau finishes its assessment in 60 years, perhaps, or perhaps sooner, they will need a human physicist to explain what happened here. Someone who was present, someone who understands the sequence." "Yes." "Will you be available?" Sokal looked at the gauge. The needle was steady. The number was ancient, older than the station, older than the compact, older than every species that had ever built a telescope and wondered what the universe was made of. The number was the answer, and it had been there all along, humming quietly in every interaction between light and matter, waiting for a room quiet enough and a physicist stubborn enough to hear it. "I'll be here," she said. The needle held at 1137, and the daylight poured in, and the silence of Bay 9 was the loudest thing Sokal had ever heard.